Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, a series where I take you through all of the major wars and conflicts throughout the history of Middle-earth, from the First Age to the Fourth Age. In this episode, we look at the Battle of Sudden Flame, also known as the Dagor Bragollach. This battle was one of the largest battles ever to be fought in Middle-earth, and would see the deaths of tens of thousands on either side, making it the bloodiest of the wars so far. Following this deadly conflict, Beleriand would never see peace again. In the previous episode, I spoke briefly of High King Fingolfin's desire to assault Angband. Supported only by Angrod and Agnor, Fingolfin's plan never materialized. Instead, the Noldor continued the siege, waiting for Morgoth's inevitable assault. And Morgoth's assault was near. The Dark Lord of Angband had now spent almost 400 years accumulating his strength, enough strength to deal a knockout blow to the Noldor and their Sindarin and Edain allies. Morgoth's plan was simple: overwhelming force. Using his vastly superior numbers and the element of surprise, Morgoth would assail all of his enemies at once. The plan was classic divide and conquer: stop his enemies from uniting and destroy them one by one. The assault would be four-pronged. One would assail the mountains of Eredwevran and destroy Hiflum. One would force the pass of Sirion. One would overrun the highlands of Defonian, and the final prong would destroy the sons of Feanor in the east. Even if only one of those assaults succeeded, it would do serious damage to the elves and the Edain. In this battle, Morgoth's force was described as countless, so we can only assume that there must have been hundreds of thousands of orcs, far larger than any army he had unleashed before. The elves and the Edain were also strong. Of the main participants in the war, Fingolfin's forces likely numbered close to 40,000, the sons of Feanor probably numbered 30,000, Angrod and Agnor's forces in Defonian probably numbered around 8,000, Nargothrond's forces likely numbered above 25,000. Of the Edain, the House of Beor probably fielded 10,000, whereas the larger, more numerous House of Hador likely fielded close to 20,000. All in all, Morgoth's foes probably numbered over 100,000 in this battle, far larger than any force they had put to the field before either. But keep in mind, these forces were all divided and in no way fighting with each other. And also keep in mind that these numbers are estimates and aren't official canon, so please don't use them as such. On a cold winter's night in the year 455 of the First Age, Morgoth began his assault. The Iron Mountain spewed forth rivers of fire and belched forth poisonous fumes. Many of the elves and Edain on Ardgallan were asleep, and thus were taken completely at unawares. Chaos broke out amongst the besiegers, thousands of them fleeing either by foot or horse to the foothills of Defonian or Eredwevran. Despite that, many of them did not escape, burning or suffocating to death on the fields, now known as Anfalglyph, the gasping dust. Those that reached safety raised the alarm, but the chaos only grew as the fire set flames to the forests among the foothills, filling the air with dense smoke. And using this dense smoke as cover, the armies of Morgoth swarmed forth across the barren plain. Hundreds of thousands of orcs led by Glaurung the dragon, now fully armoured and prepared for battle, with the Balrogs at his side. Shortly afterwards, the battle was joined across the entire front. In the west, waves of orcs assaulted the foothills of Eredwevran and the fortress of Barad Eifel. In the hills, the Noldor of Hiflum held firm, but with great losses of their own. Beneath the walls of Barad Eifel, the army of Fingolfin marched forth, and battle was joined beneath the walls of the fortress. But Fingolfin was unable to break through and retreated. In the retreat, Hador, Lord of Dol Omen, was killed whilst holding the rear guard, as was his youngest son, Gundar, who was shot to death by many arrows. Despite that, the orcs were unable to take the fortress. Neither were they able to defeat Orodreth and Minas Tirith, and the pass of Sirion held, at least for the moment. In the centre front, the orcs poured into the foothills of Defonian. Angrod and Agnor had held those hills in the Dagor Aglareb, but this time, Morgoth's armies were far larger, and more importantly, this time, no help was coming. Finally, Angrod and Agnor fell in battle, the first Noldoran princes to die since the death of Argon over 400 years earlier. Alongside them fell Bregolas, Lord of the House of Beor, along with many of his warriors. With the foothills taken, orcs poured into Dorthonion, slaying men and elves wherever they could find them. Only the western foothills remained, held by Barahir, the new de facto lord of the House of Beor, a man who was about to make a name for himself. In the east, Morgoth's assault was no less successful. Despite taking many losses, the orcs breached the pass of Aglon, driving Celegorm and Curufin and many of their people to the west, where they would eventually arrive in Nargothrond. However, the true disaster arose at Maglor's Gap. Much of Maglor's cavalry had been destroyed upon the plains of Anfalglyph. Thus, the orcs led by Glaurung overwhelmed the defenders and stormed into the lands of eastern Beleriand. In Fargelion, Caranthir was defeated and fled south to Amrod and Amrath. and the three brothers retreated south to Amon-Ereb and held against Morgoth's forces there. Of the sons of Fëanor, only Maedhros found victory, holding Himrin against countless assaults, and many of the scattered Noldor, including Maglor, fled there and regrouped. Despite Maedhros' brave defense, Glaurung and the Orcs ravaged and burned the lands of eastern Beleriand. From Estelad to the borders of Assyriand, both men and elves either fled south or to the west, anywhere that could keep them safe from Morgoth's ravaging hordes. Yet even as Morgoth found victory in the east, a new foe rose to challenge him in the west. King Finrod Felagund of Nargothrond had arrived with his fresh army, hastening through the pass of Sirion to aid his brothers. Yet this proved fruitless, as Angrod and Egnor were already dead, and Enfalglith was firmly in Morgoth's control. As Finrod hurried north with his vanguard, they were cut off and surrounded by Morgoth's armies at the Fen of Serech. There, Finrod would have died or been captured, had it not been for the courage of men. Barahir, with what remained of the forces of the House of Beor, sallied forth from the hills, driving a wedge between Morgoth's armies and allowing King Finrod a path to retreat. It was there where Finrod would give Barahir his ring, the Ring of Barahir, which would be worn by none other than Aragorn over 6,000 years later. However, the cost of this assault was heavy to the men of Beor, and the last of their strength was spent. They retreated back into Dorthonion, commencing a bloody guerrilla war against Morgoth's triumphant armies. Meanwhile, Finrod's army retreated back to safety, removing Nargothrond from the war as quickly as it arrived. As winter turned to spring, Morgoth's onslaught finally lessened, and the battle was officially over, although the fighting never truly stopped. In Hithlum, after the passing of a year, news of the deaths of the sons of Finarfin and the defeats of the sons of Fëanor finally reached Fingolfin's ears. On that day, one of the most heroic, yet most tragic moments in Middle-earth's history took place. Fingolfin rode alone to Angband and challenged Morgoth to single combat, and for the last time, Morgoth came forth from Angband, and they fought before the gates, and Morgoth was wounded 7 times. But at last, Fingolfin grew tired and was struck down and pinned under Morgoth's gigantic foot. Before he died, he stabbed Morgoth's foot with his sword, causing Morgoth to walk with a permanent limp in the future. Fingolfin's body was borne away by Forondor, Lord of the Eagles, and delivered to Turgon, who buried his father underneath the cairn that overlooked Gondolin. The real tragedy is that Fingolfin rode forth because he believed that the Noldor had been utterly defeated, and that Morgoth's victory was complete. And undoubtedly they had suffered defeats, but Morgoth's victory had not been complete, and Morgoth's forces had suffered heavy casualties as well. He had seized the foothills of Dorthonion and slain Angrod and Egnor, but he had failed to take Hithlum, and whilst he had defeated the sons of Fëanor, he had not destroyed them, and now they were starting to regroup and stabilize their positions. And to Morgoth, victory would not be complete whilst Nargothrond, Doriath, and most importantly Gondolin still stood against him. However, things would get worse for the Noldor and the Edain before they got better. In 456, at Barahir's urging, the remaining Edain abandoned Dorthonion, fleeing to either Dor-lómin or Brethil. Only Barahir and a small band of outlaws remained, fighting Morgoth's forces every step of the way until only 13 of them remained, including Barahir's son, the legendary Beren. In 457, Sauron gets involved in the war, leading a force against Orodreth and Minas Tirith. Shrouded in fear and darkness, Sauron drives Orodreth out of Minas Tirith, opening the pass of Sirion for Morgoth's forces. These forces begin to penetrate western Beleriand, causing many elves, especially the Sindar, to flee into Nargothrond or Doriath, swelling the strength of those kingdoms. But these forces that Morgoth sends south also run into heavy resistance. The Falas and Nargothrond, almost entirely untouched by the war, mount an unbreakable defense, and to the east, the men of Brethil and the elves of Doriath get their first taste of war in many years, annihilating a legion of orcs as it passes near to Brethil. Unable to make any headway, Morgoth's forces fear pushing into western Beleriand. Thus, Morgoth turns his attention back to the north. In 460, Barahir and his outlaws are finally destroyed by Sauron, all except for Beren, and in 462 a new assault is launched upon Hithlum. Hithlum, now ruled by High King Fingon, repulses Morgoth from the foothills, although not before the Lord of Dol-lómin, Galdor, is slain before Barad Eithel, much like his father and younger brother years before him. However, an assault from the north breaks through, and battle is joined upon the plains of Hithlum themselves. It's possible that Fingon might have been defeated here and Hithlum taken if not for the timely arrival of the elves of the Falas under Círdan, who sail north and attack Morgoth's flanks. His army is destroyed and the few survivors are hunted down to the very hills of the Iron Mountains. This assault proves disastrous for Morgoth, and he suspends major offensives in Beleriand, instead deciding to rebuild his strength until he has enough for a final knockout blow, and it would not be long before he got his opportunity. Despite the siege of Angband being broken, this was not the ultimate victory Morgoth wanted. He'd done plenty of damage, but most of his enemies were still standing. It's said in the Silmarillion that if Morgoth merely waited a little while longer, he could have utterly broken the Noldor and the Edain in a single battle, but his hatred of them was so great that he attacked prematurely. The victory was undoubtedly his, but it became obvious after a short while that his impatience had cost him a decisive blow. But that's not to understate how bloody this battle was. Almost the entirety of the House of Beor and Angrod and Agnor's people were wiped out. The Sons of Feanor suffered grievous losses in the east, and thousands of soldiers from Hiflum died defending Ered Wevrin. The strength of the Noldor in the northern lands was so reduced that now Nargothrond stood as the strongest elven kingdom, but Nargothrond was far from the front lines. Conservatively, there must have been at least 100,000 elves and Edain killed in this battle, and that includes plenty of women and children. But despite their losses, Fingon and Maedhros still believed that victory against Morgoth could be achieved, and less than 20 years after the Battle of the Sudden Flame, the fields of Enfalglith would once again play host to the clashing of mighty armies. But that's a story for the next episode. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, because I know I enjoyed making this one because the Battle of Sudden Flame is one of my favourite battles in Tolkien's lore, and I know I'll also enjoy making the video for the next battle as well. Leave feedback, ask questions, smoke pipeweed in self-isolation, and remember, don't challenge literal gods to single combat because you'll probably lose.